So there was a New Zealand Herald article last week about New Zealand's energy crisis and soaring power prices. So essentially, what's been happening is, if you boil it down to a simple fact, that there's not enough supply of power in New Zealand. Now, New Zealand relies on green energy quite heavily, but the problem with that is if it's solar or wind, it's something called intermittent power, which means that solar only supplies power when sun is shining and wind supplies power when wind's blowing. So you need something called firming power. Firming essentially that provides a base load regardless of there is a wind or sun. Now, generally speaking, firming can be provided by hydro, so by dams. So because you can essentially generate power as you need it. The problem is if there's a dry winter like we had last winter, there's not enough water reserves. So that supposed firming capacity wasn't there, and that's what sent power prices skyrocketing last year. So now, essentially, what needs to be done is New Zealand needs to generate more power, and it needs to generate more power, more firming power. And that could be water reserves, just like transport industry. They have essentially reserves of fuel. A similar kind of thing that needs to happen in energy. So that must be water reserves or gas reserves or any fuel, thermal fuel reserves, so that it can New Zealand can get power when the capacity, when the demand soars. Also, there is another way of dealing with it is to introduce something called demand response, which means that when large consumers of power are using a lot of power, that's obviously puts quite a strain on a network and on a capacity. So demand response means that these consumers can adjust their consumption based on the strain on a network. So when there is not enough power being generated, those large large consumers can reduce their consumption. And that's something Vector is currently working on. So this option will be available in Vector network soon for large consumers. Essentially, what the energy crisis means for small businesses or residential clients or any other really consumer that uses power in New Zealand is that power prices will, if it's not fixed, the power prices will continue to rise because the demand is only growing, demand for electricity, as more businesses open up, businesses like data centers that use a lot of electricity. As the new businesses come to New Zealand and new businesses that are highly energy demanding, the consumption will only increase, but generation is sitting at pretty much where it was sitting for the last 20 years. So the way out of it is more firming power. That could also be something that a few generators are doing with regards to geothermal generation. So they're building new geothermal plants, because that would be considered firming power, because that works regardless of the wind or sunshine. So by increasing the production, that will of course help with power prices. Now the only issue is with that is essentially for gentailers, for the companies that build this extra generation. It's counterproductive financially, because if they were to increase generation, it's a supply and demand kind of situation where if you increase the generation, you flood the market with stuff you make, that stuff becomes cheaper. So it's not in their financial interest to do so. However, there's no there's no way around it. It has to happen. Because it's just simply not enough power being generated. But it's something that I suppose we should keep in mind, that it's not very much in their interest to do so. The crux of the issue is that so you have this publicly traded company, and you have shareholders to pay dividends to. Dividends is essentially a profit share, right? Imagine coming back to your shareholders and saying, hey, you're not going to have any dividends this year because we invested that money into building the more generation, which will mean that in future the stuff that we make and sell will be cheaper. It's a hard sell. It's a hard sell to your investors. So that's essentially the crux of the issue. Now, but the problem of independent generators, right, is it's hard for them to sell that power to anybody, right? Let's say you want to build a wind farm or solar farm, right? You're building essentially an intermittent power, right? So because you're not going to be supplying power, or your solar farm is not going to be supplying power 24/7, right? So it's going to be supplying power only in certain periods, or certain times of the day. And let's say, if you have a client that you want to sell this power to, but then, which means that all the other times that when your solar farm is not generating power, you need to be able to provide this firming power to your client, and the only place to buy this firming power is gentailers, right? And they won't sell it to you because why would they? Number one, and number two, they have their own clients to sell the firming power that they need firming power for, right? So essentially, the smaller independent generators is also kind of not really making the situation that much better because they can't provide the power that is actually needed, which is firming power. I don't think that government has much, or government can has much to say when it comes to pricing of essentially private companies. It's market dictates prices, not the government. So the retailers, they need to buy power on ASX first before they sell it, and the prices on ASX are very much dictated by people who buy it and sell it, or buy it rather than sell it, so the government has very little say, and they shouldn't, in what those prices will be. The only thing the government can do or should do is to create sort of safeguards in the industry that can help with situations like last year's dry winter. Another thing the government can do is to create a single regulator in the market, right? Because you have several regulators, and it seems like they don't talk to each other all that much when it comes to regulating energy market. So it would make sense to have one regulator that regulates the whole thing. And because there's, of course, because of the nature of the industry, New Zealand's economic growth and economy is very much tied into energy, because you can't grow economy without increasing the supply, right, or increasing the energy that your country can use, right? This is why a lot of countries around the world, a lot of financially successful countries with huge GDPs, they invest heavily in energy infrastructure, because that's essentially what is needed for the financial growth. So the governments can essentially create this environment for more generation, but they can't really force companies to generate more. They can't dictate pricing. But if they create an environment by, for example, having the safeguards around energy production, having a single regulator, and it make it easier the point of entry for all these independent generators, that will essentially help, because what we really want is more generation, but also more retailers. And because when there is not enough generation, and generation is through the roof, and independent retailers can't buy power to reasonably compete in a market, they just close their doors. Every time we have an energy crisis, we have one or two or three retailers shut down. Just this year, this year and last, we had several independent companies close down, or sell to the big ones. Fixing the issue of current issue of dry winters, right? So this is like the most pressing issue. So this winter was okay because it's been raining quite a bit, right? So we're not feeling it this year. and the prices in the wholesale start to reflect this, in the short term. But in the futures for the next 3 years, it still looks on ASX. It still looks like market is very much uncertain as to what's going to happen with New Zealand power. So the prices are still quite high for the next 3 years. So even this wet winter didn't really help long term, because essentially market understands this. We're just lucky that it rained, but it's not, the problem is not fixed. So we kind of keep our fingers crossed each winter that hoping it's going to rain. So the immediate, I suppose, thing to fix is to have this enough reserve, enough power reserve, which can be in the form of water or fuel, coal, gas, that can be sparked on whenever it's needed in a dry winter. So things like Huntly power plants cannot be retired anytime soon, because that's what actually got us through last winter, Huntly. If that wasn't there, if that was retired when they were planning, I think 2015, I want to say, I could be wrong, but anyway, so at least a few years back, they wanted to retire the thing, and if it was, then we would be in big trouble. So yeah, power reserves. That's the first and foremost. The next thing is the gentailers need to invest into more generation of firming power. And essentially, I think they will come around because they'll see the demand is only growing, and they will, essentially they won't have enough power to supply. Because I believe there is enough power to supply, but it's not really in their best interest to flood the market with power that they might have, like with their water reserves. It's not in their interest to do so, but it might be soon when they see the generation is actually not sufficient to supply all the customers that want power. So you have certain times of the day when the demand for power increases. And you have large consumers of power, factories or processing plants or aluminum smelters and whatnot. So they can actually reduce the consumption by moving it to a different, like say they're producing something, so that production could be sort of slowed down in those peak times, and then move to more of a off-peak times, which in theory, which will reduce consumption, right, and demand, and that's essentially what it means. These large consumers of power will be responding to the demand on the grid, and when there is enough power being produced at certain times of the day, those large consumers of power will just move their production or operations to the off-peak hours. Now, it doesn't quite work for every type of business, because we have, for example, an entertainment business that uses a lot of power, and it's not like they can tell their customers to come back later, right? So they spark on their machines when the customers walk in. So it's not that kind of business, even though it's a very large consumer of power, it's not an option for them. But if it's a manufacturer, and they could potentially move, or adjust their manufacturing process to fit better with off-peak times, that could work really well, especially if there's a financial benefit for them, because usually on off-peak, prices for power are cheaper. So it only makes sense to produce more when demand is lower. So as far as consumers go, the best thing you can do is to sign fixed-term contracts with your retailer, because it doesn't look like prices are going down anytime soon. So the longer you can fix your pricing, the better, because once again, ASX futures for energy indicate that prices are not going down in the next 3 years. This is what the market says. It doesn't look like any of these fixes that the government supposed or gentailers need to do. It's not a short-term kind of thing. It's not going to happen in the next few years. It's just not realistic. So as a consumer, fix pricing for as long as you can. Obviously, fix competitive pricing. Don't just sign anything that the retailer puts in front of you. Do your research. Go to the market. Contact us. And find a good deal and fix it for as long as you can. Well, anything. So as far as energy prices going down, sentiment, anything is possible, but very unlikely. It is very, very unlikely because for it to happen, essentially it's a supply and demand kind of situation. So is the demand decreasing? No, it's increasing. Demand on energy is only increasing in New Zealand. So much so that there were few businesses, large businesses, shut down because they did not have, couldn't afford, didn't have enough power last year to buy, as well as, for example, the gas situation, where if you open a business, you will be hard pressed to find a gas supplier. So power companies don't want to supply gas, just not enough of it. All right. So, but demand is most certainly there. So then supply. Well, supply is also not increasing really because the only way to increase supply is to build new generation. And yes, if there's few projects underway, but it's not a year, 2 year kind of thing. It takes forever to get something off the ground, and for that to affect the market in any meaningful way. So if you look at simply at ASX futures for energy, which essentially futures is what you're paying, you're pre-purchasing power in the future kind of thing, and it just shows that prices are staying stably high for the next 3 years, and this is what the market dictates. So it is very unlikely, unless something drastic and dramatic happens, but it's very unlikely the price is going down anytime soon. Well, the good news is Simon Watts, our Minister of Energy in New Zealand, is looking into this very, very closely, and he is looking into a proposed 10-step solution by a Northern Infrastructure Forum, and he obviously taking this issue very, very seriously, and as he announced that solution, there will be an announcement in due course, potentially on energy reform in New Zealand. So something is definitely being cooked behind the closed doors. So government very much understands that it is an urgent, pressing matter. And there's a good chance there will be some sort of announcement later this year on what is to come. So though currently it doesn't look like energy energy sector is going to see any dramatic changes, but stranger things have happened. So who knows? We remain optimistic. So energy industry will stay, of course, and it will probably, of course, it will change with time, and it will morph into something that will benefit New Zealand, of course. It might take quite some a little time to get there, but we stay positive that it will.